Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Supply Chain Talk. Delighted to join you all here again today. My name is Duncan Brock, and I've got the honour of hosting Supply Chain Talk and this great discussion around topical issues associated with us in the supply chain. Really good discussion last week. We were focusing on ways of eliminating slavery across the supply chain. And some great expert joins us there to really focus and look at the challenges, but also some of the potential ways in which we can solve that and take that forward. And today we're going to be looking more at the ways of combating knowledge loss and worker shortages. Also with us, look at some of the ways in which you can use technology to sort of look at some of the ways of driving supply chains and efficiencies forward, but also, huge challenge I think everyone's facing, which is this shortage of skills and workers. So going to be really interesting discussion around that today. I've got three guests to join me, three people from very different backgrounds, but who've got some real interest and passion and interest in procurement and in supply chains and how to make them work. So that's going to be really good. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on, I suppose, the topical issues facing supply chains today, and then we're going to drop into the more specifics around looking at those skills and knowledge shortages. Those of you joining us live, it's great to have you with us. Please do engage with us. Every week now, we're getting a lot more people who are joining us on chat, who are adding their comments and their thoughts in the chat. So please use the chat function there. I see already a few people are saying hello and welcome to you. So great to see you all here, Mark, Janita, John, welcome back, and James and Trudy. So really good to see you all. And please do add your comments and thoughts in the chat. Also, as we get into the discussions, if you've got specific questions you'd like to ask any of us, and certainly the guests I've got joining me, please do add those into the Q&A, and I'll make sure as we go through the session, we try and find the time to ask those questions of the guests who are joining me, because they've got some real views, interests, and thoughts, and it's really good to make sure that they address the points and the issues that you have got. So welcome to you all, and please do use those functions effectively. Mark, hi, welcome to you, Mark Bowden. Thank you for joining us. So let's kick off. The first guest we've got today is, before I get there, one bit I'm supposed to do is encourage you to join, is we've got this wonderful thing called a Supply Chain Talk mug. And at the end of today's episode, I will award that to the person who's either added the best comment or who's also brought to life the topic with a great question. So a little bit of incentive to get the supply chain mug. I nearly forgot to prompt and plug that. So thanks for that. So let's get the first guest on. This guy called Nick Dobley. Nick's an independent consultant, someone who I've known for a number of years now through his various roles that he's had. So I'm sure it'll be great to see you again, Nick. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for coming back and joining us on Supply Chain Talk. Great to have you here. Maybe just before we kick off and talk about a topical news story, maybe Nick, just a quick intro from you, who you are, what your background is.
Yeah, sure. Welcome. Thank you very much for the kind welcome there, Duncan, and great to be having an opportunity to join you and talk about the supply chain issues we're going to talk about today. My background, I'm a procurement professional through and through. I was career of choice out of university, and over the course of the years I've been working in procurement, I effectively set up the centralized procurement team at Virgin Atlantic. Moved on from there to a company called Kingfisher, which many people may not be familiar with, but they're the mother company of B&Q and Screwfix and other retailers around the world. And effectively, I set up the group purchasing function, the group procurement function there. And then most recently, I'm actually now based in Geneva in Switzerland, and I've been transforming the procurement function for a downstream fuel supply company called Puma Energy. And again, people may or might not be familiar with Puma. They're owned by Trafigura. Trafigura, one of the world's biggest commodity trading companies, and one of the biggest companies in the world. They're a private company, and then Puma Energy itself operates petrol stations, but they operate petrol stations from all over the world, specifically in the developing world, in Central America, across Africa, and in parts of Asia Pacific, not least, for example, Papua New Guinea. So pretty varied career finds me in front of you today, Duncan.
That's great. Thanks, Nick. And I think maybe sort of that discussion and the point about petrol and oil is probably going to be one that we're going to pick up first, because we normally do a news story. And I think when we were talking about this yesterday, when we were sort of preparing for this session, we were sort of like saying, what is the news story? And there is only one real news story at the moment around supply chain, and it's the, I suppose, the impact that is happening on supply chains and will continue to happen through the conflict that's going on in Ukraine. I think a couple of weeks ago when we first talked about this, we were talking about the inflationary pressures that's going to come through we've seen the oil price spiking, gas prices going through the roof, commodities prices, grain prices. So there's certainly inflationary pressures that are there, and we're seeing those already. I'm sure we'll see the impact coming through of sanctions as they start to bite. And there will be shortages. I mean, there's going to be sort of supply chain disruptions that's going to happen as well. So I think what we decided to do today is actually just open this up and sort of be very interested from all the guests to get their take on what are you seeing and what do you think? What's your thoughts on where we're at? But also, I suppose for yourself, Nick, and the background you've got, but also within Puma Energy, what's your view on what we need to be doing or what you're doing to try and A, understand the situation, but B, understand the implications of it for you and for the organisation you work with? So just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, thanks, Duncan. I mean, it's a very, very fluid situation that we're living in at the moment. And I think, as you said, there's a massive humanitarian side to this, and on all the political element of that, I think, for the purposes today, kind of from a supply chain point of view, as professionals in supply chain, we have to stay focused on the job in hand. The challenges that we've got, it's not just about what's happening in Ukraine, it's also the restrictions that are then put onto Russia or are being put onto Russia actively as well. And it's the combination of both of those elements that is just simply causing the huge disruption in the huge amounts of the commodity markets. There are markets here where Russia and or the Ukraine dominate supply. And in those markets, then life is going to get harder and harder and harder. And as I say, it's about shortages as much as whatever the price is. Almost becomes secondary, because you've got to get hold and secure product and supply in the first instance. I was talking to colleagues of mine here in Switzerland this week. They're looking to secure 2 years worth of inventory on key commodities. If they can get it, if they can finance it, if they're fortunate enough to be in a financial position to secure that level of stock. And simply without that kind of certainty, it means they're going to be living hand to mouth for actually producing and manufacturing finished product. So, very, very real examples of procurement people making decisions, in a very fluid situation. And as I say, I think, some of the core commodities that we're talking about, whether it's food related, sunflower oil is Ukraine's a huge producer of that. The amount of wheat that comes out of Ukraine is significant, and then you're into the metals side of life as well, and then some and gases and the like. Neon is produced massively and required for semiconductor manufacturing, and a lot of us already know the story of semiconductor supply over the past 2 years, and the forecast outlook being that's not going to improve in any time soon. The situation in Ukraine and Russia is going to exacerbate that even further. So I think there's a lot of pressure on procurement, and there's a lot of pressure on procurement professionals to be securing raw materials by any means possible.
But I'm really interested in your comment there. I mean, 2 years stock. I mean,
yeah.
If you go back
I won't name the company, but I mean, it's a serious operator in the business they're in.
But I mean, I think that's to some extent that's what's changed, isn't it, in supply chain generally? Because as we've had the various shocks through the supply chains, and whether it's what was Brexit and other some natural disasters that have hit, the sense of buffer stocks and the fact that people are now looking to build them up to give them the protection and the resilience is a really it totally goes against where I worked for Black & Decker for 10 years. We were driving down just in time like no other. We'd never been there before, and suddenly the it's a real shift, isn't it? It's a real shift in
It's huge.
mentality.
It's huge. I mean, example, Puma Energy. I mean, Puma Energy as a business is in the business of supplying fuel into countries, and this is gas, this is diesel, petrol, etc., to fuel vehicles and facilities. The piece that the public see is the petrol stations, branded Puma Energy. If you're in Honduras or Guatemala, we're the number one operator in these countries. Or in Puerto Rico, we're the number two, for example. So you see Puma Energy. What you may not see, unless you live close to the ports, to the docks, you won't necessarily see the huge storage containers that are there. Now, those storage containers typically would operate around 40 to 50% of volume. They're built there for security. They're built there for long-term safety scenarios to ensure supply. During the pandemic, the stock in those storage containers went through the roof. Up to levels not quite 100%, but up to 90+%. So the commodity, and this is what commodity traders do, of course. They're anticipating the market. They're building stocks ahead of time, and then they're able to control the flow of the product into the market. The situation in Ukraine, the situation that we're living through with Ukraine and Russia is kind of a magnifying glass on those kind of practices. But I think what you'll see is that the commodity trading houses are going to be doing very well on key commodities, because they've managed to secure stock. Now, once that stock runs out, then fine, we're in a pretty hairy situation. I mean, aluminium's been a particularly troublesome area where safety stocks on the London Metal Exchange have been exhausted. I'm jumping around topics here, but fundamentally, if you've got stock, you've got a position of strength. If you haven't got stock, you're very open to a very fluid situation. And you've then got to go back and work with your finance colleagues, your senior decision makers in your business to be saying, like, how can we find working capital to invest in that stock? Which is, as you say, Duncan, is completely the reverse from the last 20 years, which is let's not tie up working capital, and there's a cost of working capital. Let's not tie it up in stock. It's turned on its head.
Yeah, it has. And I think Mark Bowden's just added a comment in the chat about, he's got a background in lean manufacturing. One of the cornerstones is just in time and reduced inventory. He says it's so interesting thinking how the material flow affects fundamental business processes for many organizations. And I think, you just talked about that, Nick, that fundamentally is changing the philosophy and ways of working and thinking, and challenging some of what were sort of proven ways in which supply chains operated. And your point about commodities and stock, if you're really good at what you do, you'll understand your supply chain, you'll understand what to do it. When it's down into tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 of your supply chain, you won't have that visibility, and therefore you may be more exposed. So I think we'll come back to this, but I'd like to bring in the other two guests, if I can, to join us and join this discussion on this. We've got two other guests. We've got Manuel Hake who's the Director of Smart Service Solutions at Voith. Welcome to you, Manuel. Thank you for joining us. And then we've also got Charlie Nigoy, who's the SVP Customer Success at LeaderStream. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us on Supply Chain Talk today. I'll give you both a quick chance to do a quick intro, and then I want to come back and get your thoughts on the crisis and the situation we're facing here. So, Manuel, maybe over to you first for a quick introduction.
Yeah. So thank you. I'm head of or director of Smart Service Solution at Voith, and have the pleasure to introduce all the smart and fancy technologies that's available on the market and do trials and POCs with our company. And if something is really, let's say, usable and fits and increase the efficiency in our process, then I have also the pleasure then to roll out such technologies within Voith. And so I do this for a couple of years. Even started in nearly 8 years ago with some basic stuff. And we have to say that in the last 5 years, the technologies increased tremendously, and we have so many technologies available. But currently we see other challenges. We will come later maybe to that.
Okay. And what does Voith do for those people who don't know the company?
Sure. Yeah, Voith is a very traditional company, over 150 years old, traditional Germany company. with nearly 20,000 employees worldwide. We do three big topics. One topic is the paper market. So we produce, we build paper machines. Another big topic is hydro. So we are manufacturer this components, turbines, generators for big hydro power plants, and the turbo area is for the for components. We deliver components in a CV, in a mobility market, and for rail, for industrial. We deliver components, oil and gas, and mining. So we have a very broad and big portfolio in this area too.
That's great. Thank you. And Charlie, quick introduction for yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Duncan. Hi, I'm Charlie Nigoy. I'm the SVP of Customer Success at LibreStream. And my background is pretty diverse. I've got a background in networking, in telecom, in optics, in oil and gas, and mining, and digital media. So a bit of blend there. LibreStream as a company has been focused for the last 18 years on enabling the workforce in the field, primarily industrial workers that aren't at desks, and helping them utilize technology out in places that aren't carpeted. They're in these more industrial settings. So we work in a lot of different industries, primarily heavy equipment, oil and gas, aviation, energy, and globally. So we're all over the world.
That's great. Thanks, Charlie. And maybe come to you first then, in terms of let's come back to this crisis that we've got between Russia and Ukraine. I think Nick quite rightly talked about there's a major humanitarian issue here that we clearly front of mind for us all. But when we're looking at supply chain and the issues and the challenges, I mean, what's your thoughts to add to some of the thoughts that Nick brought to life for us a few minutes ago?
Absolutely echoing what Nick said in terms of maybe setting aside professionally some of the bigger political and humanitarian issues, and sort of clinically looking at this from our world. When we think about supply chain, a lot of times we just think about people, the supply of workers, and obviously that's what we're going to be talking about today. One of the things that is absolutely the case is now we've got an additional challenge, right? We've all been through the last roughly 24 months of a pandemic that's affected where people are, where they can be, how to get the right people to the right place. This is another dimension of that. You've got impeded travel. You've got different levels of security and safety. So all of that starts to affect not just very accurately, as Nick said, the material challenges, but now you've got a people challenge as well. So that's something that basically every company's got to overcome in this situation. And look, we're a global economy, truly a global economy. So it's the ripple in the water over here is a giant wave over there. And so there's almost no industry that's not affected by this, no longer insulated.
I think that's a really good point about the restrictions on people, because some of the sanctions that are going in place now, some of the restrictions that will be in place, and more I'm sure will follow, is going to have a big impact, isn't it, on just how some organisations operate and how the flow of people, the flow of ideas and thoughts that would come from those people. I mean, there's going to be some a big disruption there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And there's second order and third order effects from a lot of these decisions and actions that are taken. So that's, I think the reality is it's a little bit like talking about a shift from just in time and lean manufacturing, where you might be hyper efficient, but not particularly resilient. There's going to be an increasing need for resilience, flexibility, adaptability. And I think that's our world, regardless of talking about today, last year, 5 years from now. That's just going to be the state of life from going forward.
Yeah, and I know we're going to come back and talk about sort of maybe ways of overcoming some of the shortages and knowledge loss that we've got within workers. But I think it's a really important, you say, just another shock to the system here. Manuel, what's your view? I mean, you talked about voice and the again.
Yeah, as I said,
manufacturing, you clearly are going to be exposed, aren't you, by some of the challenges here?
Yeah, sure. But as I said, we are a very global company, so this is not the only one crisis in that we see challenges right now. So as a global company, we have challenges with all the other conflicts and crises that are existing on the world. Yeah, and the pandemic came on top on that. So that means I don't want to say it's not important what's going on right now, but I want to say it's one additional crisis that we as a global company that we have to deal with. And my job, for instance, to enable all our people in our employees in the company, to deal with this, so that they do not have delivery shortage, that we don't have delivery shortage, and we don't have a lack of service at our customer side. So that's why I don't want to say it's my daily business, to deal with such crisis. But every crisis that comes in on top is too much. But at the end, in the meantime, it's more or less really, let's say, a daily business for a global operating company.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I mean, it's such a fast-moving situation at the moment as well, isn't it? You know, we were sort of a week into the crisis, and it's unfurling all the time to sort of get a sense of what's going to happen, what the impact's going to be, and I'm sure there's lots of planning and replanning that we're all going to have to do based on what's coming through. I was just also interested, Nick, you commented there about sort of the humanitarian issues, but it's also interesting. I was talking to head of supply chain for World Vision International last week, and he was also talking about the supply chain needed to support refugees, and you know how that whole logistics issue it's a whole new world, isn't it, in terms of just that humanitarian aid and how you make sure it gets to the right places in the right place. And it's fascinating talking to him just on the dynamics and the way they're having to mobilize very rapidly to try and support people who are clearly in need.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm obviously based here in Geneva. It's quite relevant because this is the home of the United Nations and also the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR. And one thing there is in those organizations, and I'm not very familiar, well, I've got some familiarity with them, but they've got a level of expertise in terms of being able to move people, being able to get supplies and resources to and from people. And I know there's been quite a lot of dialogue backwards and forwards. I've seen both here in Switzerland, but also in the United Kingdom about people are wanting to donate, they're wanting to contribute. What can I provide? What can I send, etc. And I think we've got to be, rely on the agencies, the UNHCR and others, the NGOs, to guide us about what's needed. I've certainly seen messages saying that there are supplies stacking up on the Polish border, and not and certain supplies are not needed anymore. Having said that, on the other hand, if there's communication devices and more technology related equipment that could be provided, that would be definitely in demand. So it's absolutely incredible. I mean, back in the day, we can revert back to, as I think as Manuel said, this is a crisis. As bad as it is, but you know what? Life keeps throwing crises at us. I remember reading about the reaction that the foreign, the international development people had in relation to Ebola, and the ability that they took, going into Sierra Leone and creating 10 effectively static hospitals within a number of days, let alone weeks or months, etc. I mean, I'm quite familiar with moving products in and out of Africa. Every country's got its own customs procedures, etc. So just simply navigating the supply chain and the supply and flow of product in and out of places. We're good at it in procurement and supply. We've got to continually to be good at. We've got to continue to not give ourselves too many restrictions. We've got to retain our flexibility.
Yeah, and I think I've just been reminded that we've actually got a session on Supply Chain Talk, I think in May, on humanitarian supply chains. So that's going to be another interesting topic to come back to. Let's we could probably spend all the time talking about the challenges in Russia, but that's not why we brought the three of you together. So what are let's maybe drop into the more specific topic here, where we were talking about combating knowledge loss and worker shortages, and we've already touched on some of those issues already and some of the challenges there. But I suppose, maybe coming back to the broader topic of what are the challenges the businesses are facing. We're talking about worker shortages. We talk about knowledge loss. There's been this talk about, I suppose, the Great Resignation and the churn that's happening in all organisations. I'd be very interested in just your take on that. What is the impact at the moment, and what's your thoughts on I suppose to a certain extent what's causing it? And maybe Charlie, come to you first on this.
Sure. We've been watching this for, as I said, we've been this for a long time, and there was a universal drumbeat from any customer that we engage with, really in any part of the world, who all face the same challenge. Their most knowledgeable and experienced workers are retiring. They're walking out the door for the last time. And the big issue with that is they're taking 20, 30, 40 years of tribal knowledge about how to operate the business with them. And so that is effectively gone from the company. So there's a dual challenge there. How do you preserve that knowledge so it doesn't leave? And how do you transfer it to the next generation? And by the way, when a 62-year-old leaves a company, they're not handing their job off to a 58-year-old, they're handing it off to a 28-year-old. The other interesting dynamic that goes on is that your average 20-something worker is not going to stay with a company for 40 years. You're probably lucky for them to be there for 5. So this issue of this knowledge transfer, this knowledge retention, isn't a one-time problem. It's now going to be a continuous problem. And COVID was fascinating for a whole host of reasons. Obviously, as tragic as it was, we had been modeling what we thought the world was going to look like, and COVID was an accelerator. It basically pulled the situation that we envisioned for about 2026, 2027 into 2020, 2021.
Right.
It's going to go down in history as an accelerant, really, in so many ways. Duncan, you mentioned the Great Resignation. I think in the United States alone, there's an additional 3.5 million people that basically retired early. So we thought we were going to have this person and their knowledge for another 3 years. So it's just the drumbeat's gotten louder around this challenge. I don't know an industry that's not affected by it.
Really, really good point. And I think in the chat, Supply Chain Elf's just been adding a whole load of stats, which I'm not going to read them all out, but there's a lot there. Probably, I suppose, Charlie, supporting your comment there about, in the US here, 3.5 million people that sort of just gone from the workforce. Manuel, I know when you sort of talked about your company, you talked to me quite a traditional company, been around for a long time. Presumably, you also then got sort of a stable workforce or an aging workforce. I mean, is this something that you're really facing as a challenge?
Sure, definitely. So we have no extra or special position in the market. So we have the same challenges, and with even more, because we are as a very traditional company. We have a very, very long and trusting employees in our company, and every retirement is a pain for us, because we lose value employees, and because also our products are so specific, so specialized in the area. So the domain knowledge that our workforce has is a key of the Void success. So that's why science here we have identified this as a challenge, and we work intensively on that. So my job is just one of the different jobs that we have to do, to hand over knowledge from our experienced workers to the young unexperienced workers, and to increase also the speed. In the past, we had 5 years time to to train young people, to train young employees. And today, 5 years, this is impossible. We don't have this time, and we cannot travel with to employees in parallel to every site. Impossible. This is, so that's why there is also a very big impact to Void. And if we or Void want to deliver the service and commissioning of their machines in the same quality as we did it in the last 150 years. So we have to do a lot of steps to deliver solutions to the employee that they can also do it remotely, or that they can do handover remotely, and so on and so on. I think we come to this point.
Yeah, we will, and I think that builds on Charlie's point, I think, doesn't it, in terms of the, we're losing these people, and we're losing them quickly. These people who you plan that sort of steady, succession planning. We know we've got a key expert there. We know we're reliant on a key person, but 5 years time, we'll plan for it and get ready. Feels like that's been accelerated. I think that was one of the comments in the chat there about has the last 2 years sort of accelerated the need to do this, the need to step forward. And I think what you're saying is, yes, it has. You've got the issue, but actually trying to transfer knowledge from one to another is increasingly difficult in a remote environment. You can't spend the time shadowing someone or sitting next to them or taking the time with them. And maybe that's something we will come back to in terms of that discussion. And Nick, I just want to bring you in on this. I mean, in terms of your the challenges that we're facing and the shortages. I mean, are you seeing the same in Puma as well?
I'm going to say less so, and the reason I'm saying less so is, and there's maybe a demographic scenario in here, is the countries where Puma operates in. As I've said, kind of Puma, we're in the less developed world. I'm not entirely sure, what the right phrase is, but the kind of the economically disadvantaged part of the world. And in those places, you've got a pretty buoyant, young population that is keen, able, ready, ready with the right training, with the right development to jump on board. We get huge commitment from the teams and the staff that we've got in the different cases, in different countries, different locations. And that's very much, as I say, when anyone looks at the demographic trends that the world is predicted to go through, how many of the super cities of the world are going to be in Africa? A dozen of them, a dozen out of 20 are going to be in Africa. So, yeah, I think maybe different for different businesses perspective from that point of view. And I think there's certainly an element for me in my mindset, which is how do I acquire the necessary resources for my business to operate? And I think about that as much as the people and the skills of the people, as much as I think about the suppliers coming into that we're engaging into the business. So knowledge loss is huge. I mean, anyone that's been through an outsourcing or an offshoring type transformation, and I've been through a few myself. The period of kind of 6 months when you move into the new contract provision and you've suddenly got a third party providing services to you that were previously done in-house, that 6 months is incredibly tense, incredibly challenging, because as much as you've done all the work you can to write down the processes and to do due diligence and joint learning events, etc., until you leave a new person alone to get on with the job themselves, you're never really sure how much the knowledge is transferred. But it's not what I would say in a more optimistic way. I don't think it's stopped companies from outsourcing activities and offshoring activities. So it's clearly something that is manageable. And I think what we're probably seeing now is that more and more of that's going to come into the more technical world, where the example that Manuel gives of people 5 years training, etc. We've got to, again, back in there, we've got to build in some flexibility into how we manage that particular problem, because otherwise, our business will suffer.
And I suppose that sort of maybe lead on to the point about technology. So so there's a real challenge here. There's a challenge that everyone's facing. It all manifests itself differently for different organisations, different companies. But I mean, Charlie, I mean, you sort of said that part of what LiberStream does is sort of look at ways in which you can help, apply the technologies, use the technologies to really sort of overcome some of the shortages or get people up to skills and capability quicker. I mean, maybe give some examples of the sort of things that people can do or should be doing in this space.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of facets to this. One is this idea of, and it's a little bit like moving material around, it's moving knowledge around, right? So fundamentally, how do you get the right information that's needed by the person who needs it at the moment they need it, no matter where they are in the world? And there's lots of vehicles to do that. I mean, our platform does everything from live video to data, IoT, AI, bringing all that to a person standing in the field in front of a piece of equipment that needs to solve a problem right then and there. How do we bridge that knowledge? How do we bridge that time? How do we bridge that distance? One of the things that's interesting about this, because oftentimes we get into discussions about technology, and it's almost a either or, technology or people. The reality is it's both technology and people. I'd say people are probably the critical and again, this idea of shortage, the critical part of the process. And so what our view of that is, how do you take a human who has millions of years of evolution to be very good at certain things, right? We as humans, we've got great digits, we're great problem solvers, we're creative, we work together very, very well. We're not trying to replace that. What we're trying to do is augment the person's natural capabilities and maybe do things that people don't do as well. This idea of cognitive load. How do we offload some of the cognitive stuff that people have to do to a machine that does it better? Things like humans, not great observers, not particularly good memories generally. So if you can take that and unload it onto a platform that does that work, holds that knowledge in it, and lets the skilled worker do the stuff that skilled worker can do best, that's really want to focus. And the best way to think about this is think about the last time you drove somewhere that you'd never been before. 20, 30 years ago, we got on a map, we probably would have written down a bunch of directions on a piece of paper and, found our way there. Today, we just punch in an address. We offload the cognitive load of finding our way to a system, and we as humans concentrate on driving a car, which, we do better, and at least mostly better than machines do.
That's a really good point. And as you say, it's using the technology in a way to help you to do the different things to replace it. And are you seeing, I mean, you said a bit earlier on, Charlie, that actually, the last couple of years have accelerated this. So are you seeing more companies now looking at this seriously as being something that they have to do?
Absolutely.
They can't ignore this. They're going to have to do things differently. And maybe I'll bring you in a minute, Manuel, because I think that in effect that's your job, to look at the technologies and the ways in which you can address some of these things and apply them in a way that addresses some of the shortages or the loss of knowledge that's happening across the piece.
Yeah, it absolutely became a kind of moving from the innovation world and the future thinking side, let's say 6-7 years ago, to getting more into operations to immediately, hey, we need this tomorrow. So the interesting challenge is that, or the interesting fact of that is, none of the challenges were really technological. They were all people and organizational, and the matter of just saying, let's do this. There was nothing actually preventing it until there was a forcing function that again accelerated that process.
Yeah. Manuel, I mean, you said at the beginning, your job, I think, is to look at technology solutions and how to bring those into voice and how to sort of help the organisation to move forward. So I'd be interested in your take on how technologies can be used and how you are using them within your organisation.
Yeah. Also, I have to say it is not so always so easy as it looks like. And after 5 years, yeah, so we had a lot of hard fights internally to really, let's say, introduce the technologies. This has a couple of reasons because, as I said 5 years ago, also technologies didn't have the status as today. So when we had first smart glasses in hands, and then we moved with such glasses then downstairs under the paper machine with 90% of humidity. So then this glass was immediately destroyed. Yeah, so because and we had a lot of challenge like that's yeah. In the meantime, we're really happy that that all those technologies has been improved, that they have an industry grade level in the meantime, not just for private and consumer use, and that helps a lot. But in the beginning, I have to say we had a lot of challenges to really, let's say, use such technologies. And we started in one of our biggest most efficient areas in our service area. So we said such technologies can be used maybe in a inspection, in quality inspection. That is something that we can do quite easy remotely. Yeah, instead of traveling 20 persons to customer side or at vendors that we say only a small group of people is traveling, and then the experts can then also do other things or do productive work instead of sitting in a plane or something like that. So we have also quite often the challenge that when we do commissioning of bigger installations, that we have hold points. Hold points means that quality checks has to do together with the customer, together with the vendor. So everybody has to be on the same place. And in the past, it was very easy. Yeah, it was easy to travel and so on, but then in the last 5 years, it gets more and more complicated to get all this workforce at the same time on the same place. So we said those areas would be the most or best options to prove technologies like that. So and from the service troubleshooting, then we had internally installed influencers, employees who really liked the new technology, and they told so to the other colleagues, and that really helped on us to also introduce technologies to other business areas. So what will you use? We use smart glasses for inspections, for troubleshooting. We use remote video tools, which is then a little bit different to other maybe common solutions like, with Teams or Zoom. Yeah, this is a tool for looking or to meet together. Yeah, remote videos is more to show customers and vendors what we do. You will see the difference if you go a little bit deeper in this topic. So this is used. And what we also started is first proof of concept to exercise a little bit with bots, to collect knowledge from experience and also to share knowledge from to the employees.
That's really, really interesting. It sounds like you're making some great strides there, but I think you said earlier, but it sometimes it goes slower than you would like to get the adoption of the technologies. That actually, while the technology is there, and maybe Charlie sort of comes to your point as well. The solution to there is actually getting organisations to understand how to use them and how to actually implement them that will really give the value. And maybe, as you say, the last couple of years has been interesting on that basis, because I think it sort of comes back to this, has it accelerated? It sounds like it has. It sounds like it looks, really needed to move on with some of these things because travel restricted, because of the ability for people not to travel, and an acceleration of losing good people. So that's really interesting. And Nick, I know you're a different sector, and I know you touched on this sort of the outsourcing and the service sector there, but I mean, I assume similar use of technology where you need to there to really.
Yeah, remote diagnostics and understanding, maintenance regimes across 3,000 service stations. I mean, this is less about worker shortage. It's more about worker availability and skills availability. And again, I'm talking in an international and global perspective rather than necessarily a UK or a Western Europe perspective. Being able to track all your assets, being able to, I mean, some of this is simply good maintenance practice in terms of tracking your assets, preventative maintenance rather than corrective maintenance, because corrective maintenance for us to get someone, fly them out, put them into, a situation geographically where they're miles away from anywhere else to service a petrol station. If we can, instead of having that scenario, which can be very disruptive, you have a set of continual maintenance, preventative site surveys. You push as much as we can into the people on the site in terms of their own physical and visual inspections, the machinery itself, and as much as the machinery can connect back through the internet and report on its own performance. So a lot of technological development there, trying to solve the problem, slightly different problem, but it's a skills shortage nevertheless. Outside of there, I mean, I'm thinking back now. If I reach back in my career, worker shortage has not been. It's not a new topic for a number of different industries. I started working in the restaurant and hospitality trade. Whitbread was where I first started my work, and we had 2,000 outlets across the UK. Small businesses, pubs, restaurants, hotels. Getting trained staff for the kitchen is and was and I guess it's still probably today a challenge. A huge amount of work done on apprenticeship schemes and a huge amount of work done on the image of being, a chef, being a qualified kitchen an employee to lift that profession up. But at the same time, from a procurement point of view, we were bringing in more and more produce that was ready prepared. And if you like, you could argue one faced, which one was chicken and egg in terms of the skills, which one created the problem? Was it, taking the skills out of the kitchen meant people didn't want to work in the kitchen, or were we merely responding to the fact that the skills were in shortage at the time? So, yeah, and so I think there's certainly an element here when we talk about worker shortage about what's relevant to one industry organization clearly isn't necessarily relevant to another, and also within a workforce where companies have said historically, our people are our greatest assets. That's been drummed into our mindset for a very long time. And you see people, the Great Resignation, whatever, you see people leaving, etc. Then companies are thinking, okay, how do I backfill and replace? And I can safely say, and as we've interesting some of the comments coming in here about working from home and what the pandemic's taught us all about being virtually connected. I'm leading a procurement team of 60 people. We're running program management and tracking and reporting from Mumbai across every country in the world, basically, 40 countries in the world. And in Mumbai, they're connected and I'm connected, etc. So if I've got people leaving in one geography, then I've always got the opportunity. It's not this simple, but it's nevertheless a solution, but I can replace it in another geography. And I think that's something that companies have got to be resourceful about.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Nick. And I was going to come to that. I mean, as it said, there's a great comment from Carl Morgan talking about the fact, as you say, because you're working remotely, you can move jobs. You can still be in the same, room and work somewhere else. So actually, changing jobs is actually probably a bit easier now as we go forward. But I think it also then links into a question which I think was an interesting one from Mark Bowden about, have we seen a shift in the retention models that companies are employing to keep staff? So I think that's also, we can talk about people leaving, but have we seen the shift, or do you think we should be seeing a shift in those retention models? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that generally. I mean, any of you jump in there?
I mean, I'll jump in first just to say I think it depends on the skill set and the type of activity that person does. I mean, the driver shortage that we talked about, that was very relevant in the UK and actually across other countries in Europe. That's resulted in increased payments, whether it's direct salary or it's bonus payments, being put in place with drivers. So I think, to answer that question directly, yes. I think particularly if we specifically look into procurement and supply chain, there's all sorts of different challenges with people working from home, and then, they've developed their life. They've realized the quality of life they can have without commuting, and to drag people back into the office, they're kind of saying, hang on, I'm not up for that. It's some of the reasons. So how do you find an acceptable model for working, in terms of office and work from home in those scenarios? So, yeah, I think retention is a challenging thing in terms of, contractually giving people, handcuffs and stuff to tie them into businesses, but retention around recognizing people's skills and capabilities, and that they don't have to be dragged in and out of offices, every day of their life. We've got to be quite adult about that, haven't we? And realize that, we are going to lose people if we force them to do things continually that, quite frankly, don't add any value.
Yeah,
and we're absolutely seeing that essentially it's another facet of inflation, right? We've got a little bit of wage inflation going on as a result of that. I can work somewhere else just as easily, but that is also a two-way street. I as an employee, I can work for other companies without having to move or commute or whatever. But it's also opened up a bigger marketplace for companies to find everywhere as well. So it feeds both sides of that. But in terms of the retention, some of the creative things that we've seen our customers do is, especially around people who are maybe towards the back end of their career, don't leave completely, because you can work remotely, you can retire, but give us 6 hours a week. So there's still that retention of knowledge by the customer, and retention of engagement and some level of employment in a way that's more satisfactory for that particular person. So I think we've only scratched the surface of creative companies and individuals will be in how we take advantage of the technologies that just fundamentally change the way work occurs.
No, it's a really good point, Charlie. And maybe last comment from yourself, Manuel, on that.
Yeah, I'm happy that Willy Voigt had also seen the challenge, and we had seen that our HR and management increased communication. So they invented a new program that's so-called My Dialogue, and this is intensified communication between workforce and leadership. And this was the right methodology and measurement in the right time. Because what is easier to communicate with the workforce in this time when we just click in Teams or in other tools, in Zoom, and we just are connected to the employees and talking about what's going on, what are the challenges right now in your daily business, and so on and so on. And this was intensified in the last years. And we have to see that this is really, we will see that this will also benefit, that we see benefits that the people, that the employees stay in the company, that we really value also the feedback from the leadership and so on. And this is I think one of the key, which is also easily implemented with all this technology that we have right now.
Yeah. So it's using technology in this case to communicate, to engage, to get feedback, and for, I suppose, back to people feeling valued. Because if they feel valued, you can have great retention policies, but actually people like to work in a place where they feel valued and engaged. And maybe that's a great sort of comment there, Manuel, in terms of how you go about doing that. So we're out of time, guys. I'm sure we probably got another 3 topics we wanted to cover in this discussion, but it's been really interesting to have the discussion. There's clearly a lot more focus needed in this area going forward, and I'm sure it's a topic we'll have to keep coming back to time and time again, because I think, as what you said, it's not the first time we faced shortages and challenges in skills and capability, and technology and application of it is one way of doing it. Training and skills is another way. We're going to have to get the talent, but also support people effectively. So it's been really interesting discussion. So Manuel, Nick, Charlie, really appreciate you joining me today. Thanks to the guys who've been adding comments and thoughts in chat and Q&A. Carl Morgan, I think really good question from you and comments again, so thank you for that. I think Mark Bowden was probably the one who asked 2 or 3 really good comments and questions and comments in the chat as well. So the wonderful Supply Chain Talk mug is heading on the way to Mark Bowden. So thank you for that, Mark, and thanks for joining us today. I need to show the mug again just in case you don't realise they're real. There is. I've definitely got one.
Congratulations, Mark.
I was asked the other day whether I ever drink out of it, but no, I can't. I have to make sure it's there available every week. So, but well done. Thank you for that, Mark. Next week on Supply Chain Talk, it's talking about how digital transformation is strengthening the links in the supply chain. My colleague Ian Scholar is going to be hosting that one. So I think that's going to be a different topic. We're talking about the application of digital transformation with 2 or 3 really good guests there. So look forward to watching that one, and hopefully you join us again. But anyway, Manuel, Nick, Charlie, thank you for your time today. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. This was Supply Chain Talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.